Hi guys, good morning. Patrice Juwanano again with research method. Today I'm going to explain definitions of key terms and limitations of the study in your chapter 1. Okay, without further ado, let's go to my PowerPoint slides. Okay, so this is a topic for today, definitions of key terms and limitations of the study. Yeah. Again, this refers to my book, Meniti itu Tidak Sulit, chapter 1. So please read again that part so that you can understand what I'm going to talk about. Again, just to remind you that your thesis chapters will look like this. Chapter 1 is the introduction or the background. It contains definitions of key terms and limitations of the study, which I'm going to talk about today. And in chapter 2, you have a review of related literature, method in chapter 3, findings in chapter 4, and chapter 5 is conclusion and suggestions. But now let's focus on definitions of key terms and limitations of the study. Now, definitions of key terms are keywords in your research problems or research objectives that have to be defined in order to avoid misinterpretation by the readers. Yeah. And in defining them, you have to define them according to expert statements or according to credible textbooks or articles. You cannot define them by yourself because you're not an expert yet, right? So you have to refer to expert statements written in a textbook or some journal articles which define the keywords properly. Yeah. So for example, if your research problem is like this, identifying learning strategies of high proficiency learners in vocabulary mastery. Yeah. Look at the highlighted words here, highlighted keywords, learning strategies, high proficiency learners, and vocabulary mastery. If those are your keywords, then you have to define them. You have to define learning strategies, you have to define high proficiency learners, and you have to define vocabulary mastery. Again, in defining them, please refer to expert statements or formal statements written in textbooks or in journal articles. Operational definitions of key terms are variables that need to be defined in terms of how they can be measured quantitatively. Yeah. So you define them so that readers will come to the same perception, will come to the same understanding as you do. Yeah. So this is done so that those variables will not be interpreted differently by readers. If they are interpreted differently, then it will ruin your focus of the research because everybody will have his or her own different interpretation. And you have to narrow it down so that everybody who reads your research will come to the same understanding, will come to the same perception of the variables. So for example, say that your research contains advanced English learners and lazy students as the variables in your research objective. Then you have to define them operationally. Yeah. Now this is how you define them operationally. Advanced English learners are students who scored 700 and higher on the recent TOEIC test. This is the operational definition. Now advanced English learners are limited to those students who scored 700 and higher. And that's the way you define it operationally. Lazy students, what do you mean by lazy students? Can you provide the operational definition of the lazy students? Lazy students are those who come 15 minutes late, more than 5 times. That's the operational definition of the lazy students. So that when reading this, everybody will come to the same understanding of what is called lazy students and advanced English learners. Okay, that's the use of operational definitions of key terms. Variables have to be defined in terms of how they can be measured with number quantitatively. Okay. Now, we come to the scope and limitation of the study. Scope is no more than the focus of your research. It's the focus of your research. So for example, you would say, this research is focused only on pragmatic aspects, not sociolinguistic aspects. It's like saying to the readers, look, I'm not going to deal with sociolinguistic aspects. I'm only focusing on pragmatic aspects because that's the scope of my research. Okay, right. Now, scope and limitation of the study contains statements that your research is far from being perfect. It still has many weaknesses. Yeah, the weaknesses are due to time constraints, financial constraints, probably energy constraints. Remember that you only have 3 to 4 months to finish your thesis, and it won't be long. Yeah. So within that short time, you cannot achieve things ideally. There must be, or there will be things that you have to sacrifice. There will be things that you cannot reach as an ideal stage. And that's where your weaknesses of the research are. Yeah. So I have listed some of the typical weakness in research projects. First is that instruments means questionnaires or tests or interview, yeah, or scoring rubric. Yeah. Instruments actually must be tried out and validated. Yeah. Ideally, every instrument that you use for your research must be validated, must be tried out. But somehow, due to your constraints, time constraints, financial constraints, you cannot validate them. You cannot try out them. You simply don't have time, or you simply don't have funding. Then you have to acknowledge this as limitation. You have to write under scope and limitation of the study that my instruments were not tried out and were not validated formally. That's a weakness, but at least you have confessed that. You have admitted that as your weakness. Second one is several instruments should be used, but you use only questionnaire. Again, because time constraints and probably funding constraints, you can only use questionnaire, not interview, not observation. That is also a weakness that you have to admit. Okay, so you have to acknowledge that as well. You have to acknowledge that in your scope and limitation of the study. Yeah. The third one is qualitative data. Qualitative data are data in the form of sentences, in the form of symbols, in the form of signs, in the form of utterances. Yeah. Those which are not numerical are called qualitative data. Now, when you analyze qualitative data, the analysis must be done by 2 or more coders. So ideally, you have to have another coder, another person to look into your data and to analyze them, or to categorize them or classify them, ideally. But in practice, probably it's very hard to find another one who can do that job. And that is also a weakness. That is also a limitation. So you have to acknowledge that as well. You have to write under the scope and limitation of the study that the data analysis was only done by the researcher instead of employing another operator to do the analysis. Yeah, that is a weakness, that at least you've got the guts, you are willing to admit that as a weakness in your research. Yeah. Fourth one is random sampling must be used ideally, but again, due to your constraints, you could only do convenient sampling, which is the weakest form of sampling actually. Yeah. Again, this is a weakness that you have to acknowledge, that you have to admit in your research paper, in your report. Yeah. Okay. So those are the weaknesses of the study. You have to recognize them and you have to write them under the scope and limitation of the study. Okay. Right. So that's my point. I hope I have made everything clear to you. Please study again, read the book, and listen to my explanation. In the meantime, good luck and okay. Goodbye for now. See you again in the next episode.